picture, if you will, a Victorian bedroom. The curtains are drawn heavy against the soot-stained air of an industrial city, filtering the pale daylight into muted tones of grey. A fire smoulders in the grate, not for cheer but necessity, for even the wealthiest houses were cold in the bones. Against the walls stand tall wardrobes of dark mahogany, their carved faces grim and severe. A washstand, its porcelain basin filled with water now cool and slightly cloudy, sits waiting with folded cloths. At the centre lies the bed itself, a vast contraption of iron or oak, layered with counterpanes, eiderdowns, and pillows stitched with lace. The bed appears, at first glance, a haven, a place of rest, of intimacy, of dreams. But in the Victorian age, the bedroom was more than a chamber for sleep. It was a stage upon which some of the era's most private and most unsettling dramas were played out. The Victorians, for all their outward show of propriety, carried into their bedrooms a great many secrets. Secrets of health and sickness, secrets of class and respectability, secrets of desire and repression, and secrets of life and death itself. We begin with the most obvious of functions, the bedroom as a place of sleep. To us, sleep may seem a natural and unremarkable act, but in the 19th century, it was fraught with significance. Physicians wrote endlessly about the proper way to rest, the posture, the mattress, the coverings. Entire manuals were devoted to the subject. A civilized man or woman was expected to sleep not too little, not too much, and never in ways deemed uncouth. Sharing a bed with siblings, common in earlier centuries, came to be viewed with suspicion, if not outright moral alarm. In working-class households, where families often crammed into single rooms, reformers raised their voices in dismay at the thought of so many bodies pressed together. To them, it was a recipe not only for disease, but for moral decay. In wealthier households, the bedchamber grew into a private domain. Husbands and wives increasingly slept apart, with separate rooms or at the very least separate beds. Marital intimacy was carefully scheduled, whispered about, and rarely admitted even to doctors. The bedroom, then, became a paradox, the place most associated with privacy, yet the very space where society's rules pressed most heavily. But the Victorian bedroom was not only a theatre of sleep, it was also a place of illness. Before hospitals became widespread and trusted, most people expected to be treated at home. Bedrooms doubled as sick rooms, where patients lay under heavy quilts, attended by family members, servants, or doctors making solemn visits. The very furniture reflected this reality. Beds were built strong and high, so that invalids might be turned or lifted. Side tables held medicines in coloured glass bottles, labelled with Latin instructions that few could read. Diseases we now view with clinical detachment, tuberculosis, typhoid, cholera, stalked the Victorian home. Consumption, especially, became almost romanticised, its wasting effect interpreted as a mark of refinement. Writers spoke of the consumptive glow, the delicate pallor and fevered brightness that seemed almost angelic. Behind closed curtains, though, the reality was cruel. Racking coughs, night sweats, and the slow suffocation of lungs filling with blood. The bedroom, in this respect, was not merely a place of rest, but the arena in which life and death contended daily. For many Victorians, to lie down in bed was to risk never rising again. Alongside sickness lay another presence, death itself. The Victorians were a people both fascinated and terrified by death. They dressed in mourning with elaborate care, they posed their dead for photographs, and they spoke often of the afterlife. Yet the most immediate encounter with death came, more often than not, in the bedroom. When a family member passed away, the body was usually laid out upon the bed, shrouded and arranged, visited by neighbours and kin. For days, the bedroom became both chamber of the dead and shrine of remembrance. It was here that the final farewells were whispered, the last touch given before burial. Imagine, then, what shadows must have lingered in those heavy-curtained rooms. Rooms where one had not only slept and dreamt, but also watched the dying gasp their last breath. or seen the still form of a loved one laid out in solemn dignity. To enter a Victorian bedroom was to stand in a place where boundaries blurred, between waking and sleeping, between health and illness, between life and death. But there were yet more secrets hidden in the chamber, secrets not spoken openly, for they touched upon the realm of desire. The Victorians have often been caricatured as prudish, a people who covered piano legs with fabric and fainted at the mention of ankles. In truth, they were obsessed with sex, but obsessed in a way that was riddled with anxiety, contradiction, and repression. In the bedroom, this contradiction played itself out. Advice books instructed young wives to submit to their husbands' embraces dutifully, yet without appearing too eager. Doctors warned of the dangers of excess passion, which they claimed could sap the body's vital energy. Masturbation was pathologized as a disease, said to cause madness or weakness. Beds, therefore, were built with narrow frames, harsh springs, and other contrivances to discourage solitary pleasure. And yet, beneath these strictures, desire burned. Brothels flourished, pornography circulated widely, and clandestine encounters occurred even in the most respectable households. The bedroom, with its closed doors and drawn curtains, became the very stage where repression met release. We cannot leave this first glimpse without mentioning the role of servants, for in most Victorian homes, privacy was never complete. Maids stoked the fire, changed the linens, emptied the chamber pots. Footmen carried basins of water, doctors called with remedies, and neighbours visited the sick. The bedroom may have been intended as a sanctuary, but in practice, it was porous. Others came and went, and the secrets one attempted to hide could often be glimpsed in the turned head of a servant or the raised eyebrow of a visitor. Here we draw the curtains for now. We have only entered the room. In the chapters to come, we shall pull open the drawers, lift the lids of boxes, and see what other secrets the Victorians hid beneath their quilts and within their wardrobes. From medical contraptions to mourning customs, from whispered scandals to the strange inventions designed to control the body at rest, the Victorian bedroom will prove to be no quiet place at all. We have entered the Victorian bedroom and seen that it was never merely a place of slumber. It was a theatre of health, sickness, morality, and secrecy. But to understand it fully, we must now consider the objects within it, the strange and sometimes disturbing contraptions that marked the Victorians' obsession with controlling the body. For the 19th century was an age of invention. New machines arrived with dizzying speed, each promising to improve life, to civilize the human condition, to cure ailments of the flesh or mind. And nowhere were these inventions more intimate than in the bedroom. The first we must mention is the invalid bed. Unlike the simple bedsteads of earlier centuries, the Victorians developed beds that could be raised, lowered, tilted, or adjusted in ingenious ways. Cranks and levers allowed the patient to be propped up for feeding or laid flat for rest. Some frames included pulleys for lifting ailing bodies. Others incorporated rails to prevent the feeble from falling. Such beds were marketed as compassionate, but they also revealed the stark reality. Many people expected to spend weeks, months, or even years confined to their bedrooms by illness. Consumption, rheumatism, and fevers might keep one bedridden for life. The bed became a kind of prison, and so inventors sought to make that prison bearable, or at least profitable. Then, there were the bed restraints. Doctors of the age were deeply concerned with what they termed self-abuse, by which they meant masturbation. It was believed that solitary pleasure led to madness, epilepsy, weakness, and even death. Entire medical treatises thundered against the practice, warning parents and guardians to be vigilant, and so contraptions were designed to prevent it. Straps that could tie a child's hands above the blankets. Special mittens locked at the wrist to dull sensation. Even metal cages or spiked rings fitted to the body to make the act painful, if not impossible. These devices were sold as instruments of health, but they were instruments of control, placed in bedrooms, hidden from polite conversation, yet shaping the private lives of countless young Victorians. The Victorians also filled their bedrooms with therapeutic machines. One curious example was the respirator, a mask designed to cover the mouth and filter the cold, damp air believed to cause illness. Another was the pulmonizer, a contraption that pumped medicated vapors into the lungs of those suffering from asthma or bronchitis. There were vibrating chairs, thought to stimulate circulation. Galvanic belts, charged with small electric currents, promised to restore vigor to flagging bodies. Beds were sometimes fitted with warming pans, not merely for comfort, but to ward off disease thought to arise from damp and chill. To modernize, many of these devices seem eccentric, even absurd, but to the Victorians, they were serious attempts to wrest control over bodies they perceived as fragile, constantly threatened by the environment and by their own impulses. We must also note the medical manuals that lay upon bedside tables. Titles such as Onanism, Its Dangers and Treatment, or The Family Physician offered advice on ailments, couched in stern moral tones. Some warned that too much time in bed, especially by the young, led to degeneration. Others insisted that early rising, cold baths, and hard mattresses were the surest path to health and virtue. Thus the bedroom became not simply a place of rest, but a site of moral instruction. To sleep too long, to sleep in softness, to indulge in pleasure beneath the sheets, all could be cast as sins against the body and against society. Alongside these medical concerns came the omnipresent spectre of death. As we noted before, the Victorian bedroom doubled as the place where people passed away. This led to the presence of objects designed for that very purpose. Folding screens might be placed around a dying person's bed to shield them from sight during their last struggles. Mortuary sheets were kept at hand, ready to cover a body once life had fled. Even photography entered the bedroom. Families sometimes posed their deceased loved ones upon their beds, propped as if asleep, to capture one last likeness. These images, grim to modern sensibilities, were cherished as mementos, placed in lockets or albums, reminders of the thin veil between sleeping and eternal rest. Yet perhaps the most curious secret of the Victorian bedroom was the presence of hidden sexuality disguised as medicine. Doctors, while loudly condemning self-pleasure, often prescribed medical massage for women suffering from what they called hysteria, a vague diagnosis encompassing anxiety, melancholy, irritability, or simply disobedience. The treatment involved pelvic massage to the point of what we now recognize as orgasm. Because the act was framed as therapeutic, it was permitted in medical practice. Some doctors found the procedure exhausting, and so devices were invented, early vibrators, powered first by hand crank and later by electricity. These machines were marketed as clinical instruments stored in respectable homes, sometimes even in bedrooms, while their true effect was understood, yet rarely spoken aloud. Thus, within the very space where propriety reigned most sternly, desire found a hidden channel, disguised beneath the cloak of science. When we picture the Victorian bedroom then, we must not imagine only soft pillows and quiet rest. We must imagine machines hissing with vapors, belts buzzing with electricity, straps hidden beneath quilts, and manuals warning sternly of invisible dangers. We must imagine a chamber where the line between medicine and morality blurred, where inventions promised health but enforced conformity, where pleasure was pathologized and death lurked at the bed's edge. The bed was not only a place of sleep, it was a site of constant scrutiny, a battlefield where body and soul were disciplined according to the dictates of the age. If you were a Victorian, chances are you would not draw your final breath in a hospital. You would not be surrounded by sterile white walls or monitored by machinery. You would die at home, in your own bed, in the very room where you had once slept, dreamt, fallen ill, and perhaps loved. For the bedroom was, in that age, not merely a place for the living, but the most common stage for death itself. The Victorians lived with death in ways both intimate and theatrical. They did not look away from it, as many of us do today. Instead, they wove it into the fabric of daily life. Mourning had its own fashions, its own etiquette, its own commerce, but it was the bedroom, with its drawn curtains and still air, that served as the heart of the ritual. When a person died, their body was not immediately taken away. Instead, it was carefully washed, dressed, and laid out upon their bed. The sheets were smoothed, the hands folded, sometimes a flower placed between the fingers. The face might be powdered or rouged to soften the pallor. The bedroom then became a shrine, a place where family, neighbours, and even distant acquaintances might enter to pay their respects. The atmosphere in such a room would have been heavy with symbolism, the curtains drawn, mirrors veiled in black cloth, so that the departing soul would not be trapped within their glass. Clocks were sometimes stopped at the moment of death, a silent testimony to time itself having ceased for the one lying beneath the coverlet. Candles burned beside the bed, casting a dim, flickering light. The scent of flowers, lilies, roses, evergreen sprigs, mingled with the odour of the body. A hush would fall as visitors entered, each step muffled, each voice subdued. The Victorian bedroom of death was as much theatre as it was grief. It was also, curiously, a place of display. Families of means would sometimes hire photographers to capture the deceased in their bed. This practice, now unsettling to modern eyes, was deeply meaningful to them. The photographs, known as memento mori, often depicted the dead as though peacefully asleep. A child lay gently among their dolls, a young woman in her wedding dress, an elder with spectacles still perched upon the nose. These images were not macabre but cherished, tokens of remembrance in an age when photography itself was still new, and many families possessed no other likeness of their loved ones. Thus, the bedroom became not only a mortuary, but a studio. The bed not only a place of death, but of art, memory, and sentiment. But death was not confined to the wealthier classes. In cramped working-class lodgings, a single room might serve as kitchen, parlour, and sick room alike. When death came, there was often little space to lay out the body, yet even in such surroundings, the rituals were observed. Neighbours crowded into narrow rooms, flowers placed by the pillow, coins laid gently upon closed eyelids. The bed, though humble, still bore its solemn role. The Victorians were also fascinated by the afterlife, and this fascination seeped into the bedroom rituals. Spiritualists held seances in such chambers, convinced that the veil between living and dead was thinnest where the body lay. Mediums claimed to hear whispers, to feel touches, to see phantoms in the corners of rooms where someone had recently passed away. Thus, to a Victorian, a bedroom was never entirely free of ghosts. Where so many had died, where so many vigils had been held, the air itself seemed haunted. Each creak of the floorboard, each rustle of curtain, each flicker of candle flame might be taken as a sign. For children especially, the bedroom was the most common theatre of death. Infant mortality was tragically high, and it was not unusual for a family to lose several little ones before they reached adulthood. The small bed or cradle thus became a place where grief was repeated again and again. Mothers, draped in black, might sit vigil beside the still body of a child. Fathers, silent and stern, might carry the tiny coffin from the room themselves. Brothers and sisters learned early that a bed was not only for sleep, but for the final repose of those they loved. In this way, the Victorian bedroom was saturated with sorrow and with memory. Each bed carried invisible histories, of grandparents who had coughed their last into the pillows, of children who had never grown tall, of spouses whose hands had grown cold while their partner kept watch. Yet the rituals also softened grief. By tending to the dead in their bedrooms, families asserted dignity, respect, and continuity. Death was not a sudden disappearance, but a slow farewell, staged in the very space where life had been most intimate. It is striking, then, to realize how completely the Victorian bedroom blurred the boundaries between the living and the dead. By day, one might rise from the sheets, to dress, to work, to love. By night, one might return to the same sheets and wonder if, in illness or accident, this bed might soon become one's final resting place. Even as the Victorians filled their rooms with lace and mahogany, they knew these were also the furniture of death. Every pillow, every coverlet, carried that double meaning. Here then, we pause. We have seen the Victorian bedroom as a place not merely of sleep and sickness, but of death itself. We have seen the body laid out, the photographs taken, the vigils kept, the air heavy with mourning. But the secrets of the bedroom do not end with grief, for in the next part, we turn from death to desire, to the strange contradictions of Victorian sexuality, how it was hidden, policed, and yet endlessly sought, even in the most respectable of households. The Victorians have long been caricatured as the most prudish of people. One imagines stiff collars, covered piano legs, and gasps at the sight of a bare ankle. Yet this picture is only half the truth. For while they outwardly worshipped restraint, inwardly they were preoccupied with desire to an almost obsessive degree. And where did this obsession find its stage? Most often, within the very bedroom that seemed so cloaked in propriety. To understand this, we must first consider the Victorian marriage bed. In theory, it was a place of sacred union. Advice books spoke in hushed tones of the duties of husband and wife, of the sanctity of procreation. Young brides were often instructed that their duty was to endure, not to enjoy. To submit silently, to preserve modesty, to treat the act as a solemn necessity rather than a pleasure. Yet such guidance bred anxiety. Many women entered marriage with little understanding of intimacy, some terrified, some unprepared. Many left bewildered on their wedding night. Husbands, for their part, were warned not to indulge too frequently, lest their vitality be drained. Doctors claimed that excessive intercourse could weaken the constitution, leaving men pallid, nervous, even consumptive. Thus the bed was turned into a paradox, expected to fulfill its role in producing children, yet shadowed by warnings against desire itself. Beneath this facade of restraint, however, lay a different truth. The Victorians consumed erotic literature at an astonishing rate. Underground presses churned out novels, ballads, and illustrations too scandalous for public sale. Brothels thrived in London's alleys and mansions alike. And within the private chambers of respectable homes, desire often took forms both secretive and inventive. Hidden drawers within wardrobes might contain books or photographs deemed obscene. Bedside tables sometimes concealed personal devices, the very vibrators once prescribed as medical instruments, or more rudimentary aids. The bedroom thus became a stage for hypocrisy. The outward mask of chastity hiding a private life no less sensual than our own. We cannot pass over the Victorian obsession with what they called self-abuse. To them, masturbation was not merely a moral failing, but a medical crisis. Manuals warned that it caused madness, epilepsy, weakness of the nerves, even death. Parents were instructed to watch their children closely, especially at night. And so, in bedrooms across the country, contraptions were fitted to beds, to bodies, even to pajamas. Mittens locked at the wrist, sheets stitched shut, belts and cages designed to punish wandering hands. A child might go to bed under quilts stitched with love, and beneath them feel the bite of cold iron meant to suppress desire. What a strange mixture! Affection and repression, comfort and cruelty, all bound up in the bed. Meanwhile, sexuality took strange detours in the respectable home. The very architecture of bedrooms reflected it. In grander households, husbands and wives often had separate rooms, joined by a discreet connecting door. To visit was an event, often carefully timed, and to refuse was sometimes a quiet act of resistance. In smaller houses, with shared beds or shared rooms, intimacy was both more common and more scrutinized. Privacy was scarce, and so any act of passion had to unfold in whispers, under the cover of quilts, with the knowledge that others were only a thin wall or a curtain away. Desire, of course, was not limited to heterosexual marriage. Victorian society condemned homosexuality in public, yet private bedrooms told another story. Men met in clandestine clubs, women formed passionate, romantic friendships, and in boarding houses or rented rooms, love forbidden by law and custom was nevertheless lived. The very secrecy of the bedroom made it possible. Behind locked doors, the forbidden could be practiced, even if discovery meant ruin. Even within marriage, desire could not be fully suppressed. One striking example lies in the medicalization of women's bodies. A diagnosis known as hysteria was applied to women who showed signs of anxiety, melancholy, irritability, or simple defiance. The supposed cure was pelvic massage administered by doctors, an extraordinary intrusion framed as medical duty. The procedure was time-consuming, and many physicians grew weary of it. Thus, the invention of mechanical aids, early vibrators, first powered by hand crank, later by electricity. These devices, marketed as clinical instruments, often found their way into bedrooms, disguised as respectable tools of health. Yet their effect was unmistakably sexual. Here, then, we see a society that claimed to repress desire, yet invented machines to indulge it under the mask of medicine. The bedroom, in this respect, was the perfect paradox of Victorian life. It was the chamber most associated with morality, yet it hid the very things morality sought to suppress. It was the place where advice manuals preached restraint, yet also where hidden photographs, devices, and encounters defied those sermons. To walk into such a room was to step into a world of contradictions: lace and iron, duty and longing, silence and whispered passion. We might imagine, in some respectable London townhouse, a wife kneeling by her bed, reciting her prayers in the flicker of lamplight. Beside her, in the nightstand drawer, lies a medical instrument disguised as a therapy for nerves. Across the hall, her husband sleeps apart, having consulted his own manual on the dangers of indulgence. And yet, within the city outside, desire hums through brothels, booksellers, and quiet bedrooms, just like this one. The Victorians could never silence their passions entirely. They only forced them deeper into the very spaces where silence was most expected. Step into a Victorian bedroom, and the first thing you notice is its weight. Not simply the air, which is thick with coal smoke, perfume, or camphor, but the weight of the furniture itself. Dark woods, towering wardrobes, heavy bedsteads, carved washstands, dressing tables groaning under the clutter of bottles and brushes. Every object feels solid, imposing, as though permanence were its chief virtue. This heaviness was not accidental. To the Victorians, furniture was a moral statement. It should be respectable, durable, resistant to frivolity. Yet beneath this surface of propriety, these pieces often concealed private functions: little drawers, secret compartments, clever mechanisms. The furniture of the bedroom, like the Victorians themselves, wore one face for the world and another for the night. Let us begin with the bedstead. Victorian beds were vast, often raised high above the ground. This was partly practical. It allowed for storage beneath and kept sleepers away from drafts. But it also served a more symbolic purpose. To mount such a bed was an act of climbing, a kind of ritual elevation. Husbands and wives, invalids and children alike, disappeared into a fortress of pillows, bolsters, and coverlets. The beds were sometimes so high that steps were required. Beneath them might be chamber pots, tucked discreetly in porcelain or brass. Curtains could be drawn around the frame, shutting the sleeper off from the world entirely. Within such curtained alcoves, secrets could flourish unseen, acts of intimacy, illness, or even death. Some bedsteads were fitted with hidden mechanisms, levers for tilting, rails for invalids, or concealed straps for what doctors delicately called correction. What appeared to be a respectable four-poster might, under closer inspection, reveal itself as a contrivance of restraint or of control. Next, the wardrobe. Towering and austere, wardrobes were more than mere storage. They were repositories of identity, holding not only garments but symbols of status and virtue. A respectable woman's mourning dresses, stiff with crepe, would hang there beside the softer fabrics of evening gowns. A man's frock coats, his stiff collars and gloves, proclaimed his place in the world, even while concealed behind closed doors. But wardrobes also held things less respectable. Hidden at the back might be letters tied with ribbon, photographs too scandalous to display, or trinkets from clandestine encounters. Some wardrobes even contained secret panels or false backs, designed to conceal valuables from servants. or secrets from spouses. Imagine, then, opening such a wardrobe. The rustle of fabric, the faint scent of lavender sachets masking something else, the weight of secrets tucked between the folds of lace. Upon the dressing table lay the smaller mysteries. This piece, often wide and adorned with a mirror, was crowded with objects. Hairbrushes of ivory or tortoiseshell, combs, silver-topped bottles of perfume, smelling salts, or hair tonic. Small drawers might hold rouge, face powders, or even discreet contraceptives hidden under handkerchiefs. The dressing table was the theatre of transformation. Here, a woman painted her cheeks before a ball, or rubbed cold cream into her skin before bed. Here, a man applied moustache wax or hair dye. Appearances were constructed in this space, yet always underlain by secrets. A grey hair hidden, a blemish covered, a faint whiff of illicit perfume disguised. And within its drawers might lie objects never meant to be seen by children or guests, from forbidden books to the buzzing mechanical aids once marketed as treatments for female hysteria. The washstand was another essential. A porcelain basin and ewer stood ready each morning and evening, filled with cold water hauled upstairs by servants. Soap, towels, and toothbrushes lay beside it. Hygiene, for the Victorians, was both a practical necessity and a moral duty. A clean face and hands spoke of respectability, even if the world outside was blackened with soot. But the washstand was also where secrets showed themselves. A bloody handkerchief from a consumptive cough might be rinsed in its basin. Stains on linens, whether from illness or intimacy, were scrubbed away in its porcelain depths. Bottles of laudanum, smelling salts, or even abortifacients might be tucked among the more innocent toiletries. Thus, the washstand, that symbol of purity, was often the very site where purity was lost or concealed. We must also consider the trunks and boxes that littered Victorian bedrooms. Travel was becoming more common, and with it came steamer trunks, hat boxes, and writing cases. These containers served not only for journeys, but as hiding places. Within them might lie letters, secret diaries, or keepsakes, lovers' tokens pressed beneath clothing, banned novels tucked under false bottoms, perhaps even surgical instruments for illicit purposes. Every Victorian household carried with it these portable chambers of secrecy. To open a trunk was to open a life half hidden, a story untold. Even the architecture of the room carried secrets. False walls or panels sometimes concealed cupboards. Trapdoors in floors or ceilings allowed servants to move unseen. In boarding houses or rented lodgings, thin partitions allowed whispers, cries, or coughs to be overheard, or carefully ignored. Privacy was always fragile. Doors had locks, yes, but servants often carried keys, and silence was rarely complete. Every creak of floorboards, every muffled sound through plaster walls, reminded the occupant that the secrets of the bedroom were never truly safe. Thus, the furniture of the Victorian bedroom was more than mere wood and fabric. It was a stage upon which the dramas of health, desire, death, and secrecy played out. Heavy and respectable on the surface, yet filled with drawers, compartments, and contraptions, each piece reflected the paradox of the age: propriety masking passion, morality concealing mortality. Here we pause once more. We have seen the furniture not as lifeless objects, but as participants in the secret life of the Victorian bedroom. Beds that concealed restraints, wardrobes that hid letters, dressing tables that disguised desire, washstands that washed away traces best forgotten. In the next part, we shall shift our gaze from the furniture itself to those who moved among it, the servants. For in the Victorian home, the bedroom was never entirely private, and often it was the servants, silent, watchful, and ever-present, who knew more of its secrets than anyone else. In Grand Victorian homes, the bedroom was never truly private. However thick the curtains, however firmly the doors were closed, there were always footsteps in the corridor, always a knock at the door, always a servant entering with a basin of water or a tray of tea. To live in such a house was to live surrounded. The master and mistress might think of their bedrooms as sanctuaries, but in truth, they were observed, attended, and sometimes quietly judged by those who kept them in order. The lady's maid was one of the most intimate figures in this drama. She attended her mistress at the dressing table, brushing her hair, lacing her corset, arranging her gown for the day. In the evenings, she reversed the process, loosening stays, unpinning elaborate hairstyles, folding clothes into wardrobes. She handled jewelry, perfume bottles, rouge, all the tools of transformation. Through this daily intimacy, the lady's maid became privy to her mistress's secrets. She noticed if a dress grew tighter with pregnancy, if letters were tucked hastily into drawers, if tears stained a handkerchief after some domestic quarrel. Though she was expected to keep silent, she carried these observations with her, a storehouse of unspoken knowledge. The valet played a similar role for men. He laid out shirts, polished boots, kept razors sharp and moustaches trimmed. He saw the stains of late nights, the letters hidden in pockets, the signs of indulgence or excess. A valet knew more of his master S's habits than perhaps the master S' own wife did. And, like the lady's maid, he was sworn to discretion, though gossip often filtered downstairs to the servants' hall. The more humble housemaids also had their part. They entered the bedrooms in the morning to empty chamber pots, sweep hearths, and make beds. They carried away linens that bore witness to illnesses, to childbirth, to death, or to the simple untidiness of life. In scrubbing stains, in folding sheets, they encountered the private traces of the family's existence. It was said that no one knew a household better than its maids, for while visitors saw only parlours and drawing rooms, the maids saw the bedrooms, saw the sickness, the sorrow, the quarrels and reconciliations played out in private. Even more discreet were the nurses and governesses, who tended to children within their nurseries and bedrooms. They oversaw sick beds, soothed fevers, comforted nightmares. A nurse might be the first to notice a child wasting from consumption, or the first to suspect a mother's hidden grief. Governesses, often outsiders within the household, lived in a half-world between servant and family, privy to the secrets of both. The bedroom fire was another point of contact. Servants rose before dawn to creep into rooms and stoke the grates, ensuring their masters woke to warmth. To do this, they sometimes entered silently while the family still slept. Imagine then how much could be observed in those quiet, early hours. The intimate sprawl of bodies under blankets, the mutterings of dreams, perhaps even things the sleepers would rather remain unseen. Privacy, as we understand it, scarcely existed. There was, too, the question of trust. Some servants were fiercely loyal, keeping their masters' confidences to the grave. Others whispered secrets downstairs, where tales of affairs, illnesses, and quarrels circulated with the soup and bread. In some cases, servants blackmailed employers, threatening to reveal scandals if dismissed without reference. The Victorian bedroom, in this sense, was a stage with many unseen spectators. Its dramas were rarely confined to the couple behind closed doors. They were absorbed, retold, and sometimes reshaped by those who served them. We must also remember that many servants themselves lived in bedrooms scarcely worthy of the name. While the master's chambers were draped in velvet, the servants' rooms were tucked under eaves or down narrow corridors. A narrow iron bedstead, a single blanket, a washstand with chipped basin. This was the reality of the maid or the footman. Their bedrooms, too, bore secrets. Letters hidden beneath pillows, coins saved in boxes, small tokens of affection or longing. To the masters, these rooms were invisible, yet within them servants carved out what little privacy they could. The contrast is striking. Upstairs, heavy mahogany furniture, lace-draped beds, rituals of dressing and undressing performed with ceremony. Downstairs or in the attic, iron bedsteads, rough sheets, perhaps two maids sharing a cramped space, whispering their own stories in the dark. And yet, despite this divide, the two worlds were linked. For servants moved daily between their own modest quarters and the ornate bedrooms of their masters, carrying with them the knowledge of both. In this way, the Victorian bedroom was never wholly private. It was porous, its secrets seeping downward into the servants' hall, its dramas observed, if silently, by those who dusted its surfaces and tended its fires. The master and mistress might imagine themselves hidden, but in truth, they were surrounded by witnesses. Every cough, every quarrel, every stain on a sheet, all of it passed through the hands and eyes of those who kept the house running. Here, then, we pause. We have seen how the bedroom was shaped not only by its furniture, but by those who entered it daily. The lady axemaid, the valet, the housemaid, the nurse. We have seen how privacy was an illusion, how secrets were always at risk of exposure, how the lives of masters and servants intertwined within these chambers. In the next part, we shall turn to the bedroom as a site of childbirth. How Victorian women laboured in their beds, attended by midwives or doctors, and how the bedroom became the threshold between life and death for mother and child alike. To us, childbirth may conjure images of sterile hospital wards, white uniforms and clinical safety. But to the Victorians, it was not a public, medicalised event. It was a private, domestic ordeal, and almost always it unfolded in the bedroom. Here, beneath heavy quilts and drawn curtains, women laboured, some surrounded by family, some attended by midwives, some assisted by doctors who were only just beginning to claim authority in matters once left to women. The bedroom thus became both cradle and coffin, a threshold between life and death where joy and grief often collided. In the early part of the century, childbirth was still largely the domain of midwives. These women carried with them generations of practical knowledge, herbs for easing pain, and steady hands for guiding a child into the world. Their work was often unseen, uncelebrated, yet vital. But as the century progressed, physicians, almost always male, increasingly stepped into the bedroom. Armed with forceps, medical jargon, and a sense of professional authority, they began to displace the traditional midwives. Some women welcomed them. Others feared their interventions. The presence of a man in the bedroom during such moments was itself a breach of propriety, and yet necessity overruled propriety when lives were at stake. The risks of childbirth were immense. Without antiseptics or antibiotics, infection was rife. Puerperal fever swept through households, taking mothers within days of delivery. Hemorrhage, too, was a constant threat. To give birth in the Victorian bedroom was to gamble with mortality. The statistics are sobering. Thousands of women died each year in childbirth, leaving grieving husbands and orphaned infants. Every family lived with this shadow. To prepare for labour was also to prepare for death, and many women wrote farewell letters or set their affairs in order before entering their confinement. The bed itself bore the marks of these ordeals. Sheets were stained, mattresses ruined, wooden frames scarred by years of labour. Servants carried away bloodied linens to be scrubbed in basins, always aware that the signs of life and death were soaked into the very fabric of the household. Some families, wealthier ones, kept a special lying-in room for childbirth, often adjacent to the master bedroom. Here, the mother would spend weeks in confinement, tended by nurses, her diet controlled, her visitors carefully limited. But in most households, the ordinary bedroom doubled as birthing room, sick room, and nursery alike. For those who survived, the bedroom then transformed into a nursery of sorts. Infants, swaddled tightly, slept beside their mothers in cradles, or even in the same bed. Breastfeeding was encouraged in some households, frowned upon in others, with wet nurses employed when fashion or frailty dictated. Mothers were expected to rest, yet also to resume their household duties swiftly, but survival was never guaranteed. Infant mortality was high. Cradles stood beside beds where babies might live only days or weeks before succumbing to disease. Parents sometimes baptized newborns almost immediately, fearing they might not live long enough to be christened in church. Thus, the joy of birth was shadowed by the constant possibility of loss. It is striking how deeply silence surrounded these events. Respectable families rarely spoke openly of childbirth. It was considered indelicate, even shameful, to discuss the details. Women suffered in their bedrooms behind closed doors, while the household outside went on with its daily routine. Even medical manuals used euphemisms, skirting the realities of pain, blood, and risk. For many young brides, the mysteries of the wedding night were swiftly followed by the mysteries of pregnancy, entered into with little guidance and much trepidation. The Victorian bedroom, for them, was not a place of restful privacy, but a chamber of trial, a crucible where their bodies were tested to the very edge of survival. And yet, for all its danger, childbirth in the bedroom also held moments of tenderness. Husbands, excluded from the act itself, often hovered outside in anxious vigil. Mothers, sisters, or female friends sat with the labouring woman, holding her hand through hours of pain. When the cry of an infant finally filled the air, relief swept through the household like a benediction. The bedroom, which had so often echoed with the last breaths of the dying, could just as easily resound with the first cries of the newborn. In this sense, the Victorian bedroom embodied the circle of life more vividly than any other room in the house. It was where one was conceived, where one might be born, where one spent long years in sickness and health, where one lay in passion, where one perhaps died, and where one was mourned. The bed itself bore witness to beginnings and endings alike, its linens stained with both life's entry and life's departure. Here, then, we pause. We have seen the Victorian bedroom as the stage of childbirth, at once sacred and dangerous, tender and terrifying. We have glimpsed the silent labours, the risks of infection, the joy of survival, the grief of loss. In the next part, we shall turn from the dramas of birth and death to the subtler matter of sleep itself, the curious beliefs the Victorians held about how one should wrest the superstitions surrounding nighttime, and the ways in which even dreams were thought to reveal hidden truths. To the Victorians, sleep was never a simple matter of closing one's eyes. It was a subject of science, superstition, and moral concern. Entire manuals were devoted to the correct way of sleeping, and advice was given in tones as earnest as sermons. For in an age obsessed with order, discipline, and health, even the most private act of lying down to rest became freighted with meaning. The first and most basic concern was posture. Physicians of the day disagreed violently over the proper way to sleep. Some insisted that lying flat on the back was best, claiming it allowed the lungs to expand fully and prevented deformity of the spine. Others warned against it, declaring that it pressed too heavily on the heart. Side sleeping was praised by some and condemned by others. Manuals advised alternating sides during the night, lest one lung grow weaker than the other. Sleeping face down was considered not only dangerous but indecent, for it was thought to invite unwholesome excitations of the body. Thus, even in the act of sleep, the Victorians imposed rules, as though morality itself extended beneath the sheets. Next came the matter of beds and bedding. Hard mattresses were encouraged for the young, lest soft ones lead to weakness or indulgence. Feather beds, though luxuriously warm, were condemned by some reformers as suffocating and enervating. Sheets were to be changed regularly, not only for cleanliness, but to guard against the miasmas believed to rise from stale linens. Windows, too, were a subject of debate. Should they be shut tight against the foul city air, or left ajar to admit God's fresh breath? Reformers argued over drafts and dampness, each claiming the health of the nation depended upon the proper airing of bedrooms. But beyond science lay superstition. It was widely believed that the direction of one's bed could affect sleep and health. To lie with one's head to the north was said to align the body with magnetic forces, producing calm dreams and long life. To face south, some warned, was to invite nightmares and wasting illness. Mirrors in bedrooms were covered at night, lest the soul, wandering in dreams, be startled by its own reflection and fail to return. Candles were snuffed with care, for their flames were thought to attract restless spirits. Dreams themselves were treated with solemnity. Entire books of dream interpretation circulated, offering guidance. To dream of teeth falling out foretold death. To dream of weddings, sorrow. To dream of water, a journey to come. Thus, the bedroom was not only a place of sleep, but a portal to prophecy. there were also fears of the night more corporeal. Nightmares were attributed not merely to indigestion, but to demons or witches. The figure of the night hag, an old superstition, lingered in Victorian folklore. To wake in the dark, paralysed, with a crushing weight upon the chest, was explained as a visitation by some unholy presence. Today, we might call it sleep paralysis. Then, it was a haunting. Parents warned children not to sleep with arms outside the covers, lest spirits tug them away. Servants whispered that to hear footsteps in a sleeping room when no one was present was an omen of imminent death. The darkness of the Victorian bedroom was deep indeed, lit only by a candle or a faint glow from the fire. In such shadows, it is little wonder that fears took root. The act of rising from bed was also subject to ritual. Early rising was praised as a moral virtue. Early to bed, early to rise was more than a proverb. It was an article of faith. Reformers scolded those who lingered in bed past dawn, warning of weakened nerves, ruined health, and moral decline. Children were roused with cold water splashed upon their faces. Workers were urged to begin the day briskly, lest idleness creep in. Even the wealthy, though free from necessity, were warned against sloth. The very timing of sleep was thus turned into a moral duty. To rise early was to be virtuous. To sleep late was to court both disease and disgrace. And yet, despite these strictures, the Victorian bedroom was also a place of dreaming escape. For those trapped in the routines of factory, office, or household, dreams offered freedom. Diaries reveal Victorians recording their nocturnal visions, interpreting them, sometimes treasuring them as glimpses of another world. Spiritualists even claimed dreams were a form of communion with the departed, a nightly crossing of the veil. The bedroom, then, was not only the chamber of physical rest, but of imaginative wandering. In sleep, Victorians encountered ghosts, omens, lovers, landscapes. To them, the world of dreams was no less real than the waking one. Thus, the Victorian approach to sleep reveals much about the age itself. They sought to regulate it with science, to moralize it with sermons, to sanctify it with rituals, and to fear it with superstitions. They saw in it both danger and possibility, a nightly death and rebirth, a time when the boundaries between worlds grew thin. And all of this unfolded in the bedroom, a place where one's body was judged even in unconsciousness, where the arrangement of furniture and the timing of waking carried moral weight, where dreams themselves were freighted with meaning. Here then, we pause. We have seen the Victorian bedroom as a theatre of sleep, filled with rules about posture, bedding, rising, and dreams. A place where science and superstition met, where morality crept even into slumber, where the night itself seemed alive with omens. In the next part, we shall turn from sleep to the objects Victorians kept upon their bedside tables and within their drawers, the small possessions that reveal more about private lives than any grand piece of furniture. Medicines, mementos, tokens of love, and perhaps things never meant to be found. If the bed was the stage of the Victorian bedroom, then the bedside table was its prop cupboard, a place where the most ordinary objects could take on startling significance. Unlike the grand wardrobes or heavy chests, which displayed wealth to any visitor, the nightstand and its drawers were rarely seen by outsiders. Yet they were repositories of intimacy, filled with items that spoke volumes about the life of the person who slept beside them. First, there was the matter of medicine. Victorians were great believers in remedies of every kind, from the scientific to the utterly quackish. On many a bedside table stood bottles of laudanum, an opium tincture taken for pain, sleeplessness, coughs, or simply melancholy. Laudanum was sold over the counter, cheap and widely used, and though it soothed, it also addicted. Countless Victorians drifted into dependence, their nights dulled by its narcotic haze. Beside it might stand smelling salts for reviving faintness, patent syrups promising relief from coughs, or jars of ointment for rheumatism. The bedroom was thus part pharmacy, lined with remedies that today we would consider more dangerous than the ailments they treated. Books, too, were common at the bedside. The Bible often lay within reach, used not only for nightly prayers, but for pressing flowers, keeping records of births and deaths, or marking passages that spoke to personal sorrow. Alongside it, novels might be hidden, for reading fiction late into the night was frowned upon by some as a frivolous, even corrupting habit. Women, in particular, were warned against devouring novels in bed, lest they inflame the imagination and disturb sleep. Yet diaries reveal that many did so anyway, losing themselves by candlelight in the pages of Dickens, the Brontes, or lurid romances borrowed from circulating libraries. Then there were the letters, bundles tied with ribbon, hidden in drawers, kept close at hand. Some were love letters, kept secretly long after engagements, affairs, or widowhood. Others were correspondence from children or siblings, read and reread in moments of loneliness. The bedroom, more than any parlour, was the archive of private affections. Letters carried secrets, promises, betrayals, words never meant for public ears. In an age when paper was dear and handwriting intimate, the presence of such letters by the bed reveals just how much emotional life was conducted in ink and sealed envelopes. Small trinkets and mementos abounded, lockets containing hair, sometimes of a lover, sometimes of a deceased child, miniature portraits, tucked away from display but too precious to discard, rings or brooches once given as tokens of courtship, a pressed flower, brittle yet still carrying the memory of a summer's walk. These were items of memory, half sacred, half sentimental, which never appeared in household inventories yet were of inestimable value to their owners. The bedroom drawer was their sanctuary, the place where public life's rigid rules could be set aside and private tenderness preserved. We should not forget the less respectable items. Hidden away, often carefully concealed, were things never spoken of in polite company. French novels with suggestive illustrations, contraceptive devices, rudimentary and controversial, purchased quietly from chemists, even early forms of pornography, passed hand to hand and tucked beneath mattresses. Such objects were condemned from pulpits and parlours alike, yet their very presence in bedrooms tells us they were more common than the public morality of the time would admit. The Victorian bedroom, far from being a temple of virtue, was often a hiding place for the unspoken desires of its inhabitants. For the poor, bedside possessions were simpler, but no less telling. A candle stub, a single prayer book, perhaps a lucky charm or small keepsake. A child might sleep with a doll carved from wood, a mother with a single piece of jewellery pawned and redeemed more than once. Even in the meanest rooms, objects carried meaning. Talismans against hardship, tokens of memory, scraps of hope. There is, too, the curious case of death tokens. Victorians were unafraid to keep mementos of the dead close at hand. A lock of hair, braided into jewellery. A photograph of a deceased child, taken in the tradition of post-mortem portraiture. Some even kept death masks or miniature coffins as keepsakes. To us, this may seem macabre. To them, it was a natural extension of remembrance, a way of keeping the lost still present. Thus, the bedside table was not merely a place of living habits, but of communion with the dead. What strikes us most, when we peer into these drawers and onto these nightstands, is how the Victorian bedroom was layered with contradiction. Here was the Bible beside a scandalous novel, the laudanum bottle beside the smelling salts, the love letter beside the mourning locket, the respectable and the forbidden side by side. In this small square of wood beside the bed, the entire spectrum of Victorian life was contained: faith, fear, memory, indulgence, and desire. It was here that the private self resided, concealed from visitors, yet ever present to the one who reached for them in the night. Here, then, we pause. We have opened the drawers of the Victorian bedroom, finding medicine and novels, letters and mementos, secrets and sins. We have seen how even the humblest objects can speak of lives both tender and troubled, respectable and rebellious. In the next part, we shall widen our gaze to the rituals of mourning in the bedroom, how death entered these rooms, how bodies were laid out upon beds, and how grief reshaped the most intimate of spaces. In the Victorian world, death was not hidden away in hospitals or hospices. It entered the home and settled most often in the bedroom. This was where final breaths were drawn, where family gathered around the bed, and where rituals of mourning began before the body ever left the house. The bedroom, in this way, was not only a place of rest and birth, but a stage for the last act of life itself. When illness came, consumption, typhus, scarlet fever, cholera, it was in the bedroom that the patient lingered. Beds became sick beds, attended by anxious families, and in wealthier houses, by doctors making their visits. The atmosphere was thick with medicines, poultices, the scent of vinegar or carbolic acid, all part of desperate attempts to ward off infection. Windows might be open for fresh air, or tightly shut against imagined miasmas. Curtains were drawn, lamps turned low, voices hushed. The bedroom was transformed into a vigil chamber, its ordinary functions suspended in the shadow of impending death. And when death came, the bed became the bier. The body was washed, dressed in clean linen, or even burial clothes, and laid out upon the very mattress where life had ended. Candles were lit at the head and foot, a ritual as ancient as Christendom. Relatives entered to say their farewells. Servants stood quietly, waiting, their faces solemn. It was not unusual for the body to remain in the bedroom for several days. Neighbours came to pay respects. Children, too, were often brought in, for Victorians believed it was right for the young to see death and learn its inevitability. The rituals of mourning spread outward from that bed. Black crepe was hung upon mirrors and doorknobs, for it was said that mirrors could trap the soul. Clocks were stopped at the hour of death. The very furnishings of the bedroom might be shrouded in dark cloth, as if the room itself were in mourning. Women of the household donned heavy black dresses, veils, and jewellery made from jet or woven hair. Men wore black armbands. The bedroom, once a chamber of intimacy, became instead a solemn theatre of grief. Photographers were sometimes summoned to take a post-mortem portrait. In these images, the deceased lay peacefully in bed, often surrounded by flowers. Children were posed with their favourite toys. Adults were framed as though asleep. To modernise these photographs may appear eerie, but to Victorians they were cherished keepsakes, sometimes the only likeness a family possessed. Thus, the bedroom not only bore witness to death, but also became the setting for its remembrance, captured forever in sepia tones. It was believed that the soul lingered in the bedroom after death. Stories circulated of deathbed visions, of dying people seeing departed relatives waiting to guide them, of spectral lights or sudden silences at the moment of passing. Survivors often reported feeling the presence of the dead still in the room, as though the bedroom itself held their essence for a time. To comfort themselves, families placed tokens near the body, a crucifix, a lock of hair, a favourite book. The boundary between life and death was thought thinnest in those hours, and the bedroom stood as the threshold. For the poor, death in the bedroom was no less solemn, though it lacked the trappings of crepe and jet. A small bed in a crowded room might serve as the deathbed. Children might be asked to step outside while a mother breathed her last. Yet even in poverty, rituals endured. Candles lit, prayers murmured, neighbours gathering. The respect given to the dead was universal, no matter how humble the room. What strikes us most is how present death was in daily life. In an age of high mortality, almost every family had lost a child, a sibling, a parent. Bedrooms were spaces of constant transition, where birth and death followed one another with heartbreaking frequency. Victorians did not flinch from this reality. Instead, they ritualized it, surrounding the bedroom with symbols of grief and remembrance. For them, death was not an intrusion, but part of the natural order of things. The bedroom was simply the stage upon which the final act played out. Here, then, we pause. We have seen the Victorian bedroom as a chamber of mourning, where bodies lay in state, mirrors were shrouded, clocks were stilled, and grief was given form. We have seen how the bed, once a site of passion and birth, could as easily become a bier, carrying the weight of death. In the next part, we shall turn to the secrets of morality and shame that also haunted these rooms. The hidden pregnancies, the quiet scandals, the moral panics whispered about behind closed doors. The Victorians, outwardly so stern and proper, were never free of the temptations and indiscretions that lurked behind closed doors. The bedroom, that chamber of intimacy, was also the scene of secrets carefully hidden from polite society. For though the age was obsessed with morality, it was equally obsessed with transgression. Perhaps the most dangerous secret of all was the hidden pregnancy. Unmarried women who found themselves in trouble faced ruin. Respectability could vanish overnight. To bear a child outside of wedlock was to risk being cast out by family, dismissed from service, or reduced to destitution. Thus, bedrooms became places of concealment. Dresses were altered to disguise growing figures. Women feigned illness to avoid visitors. In desperate cases, they sought potions or procedures to end a pregnancy, dangerous, often deadly measures carried out in secrecy. When the child was born, it might be spirited away to an orphanage or given to relatives to raise as their own. Bedrooms, therefore, held within them untold dramas of concealment, fear, and despair, the evidence hidden beneath quilts and whispered only to trusted confidants. But scandal did not always involve the poor. In wealthier homes, bedrooms could become arenas of illicit passion. Affairs between masters and servants, between mistresses and guests, between men of power and women they sought to control. All were whispered of in drawing rooms, but rarely admitted aloud. The very architecture of great houses, with their corridors and servants' stairs, facilitated secrecy. Letters were passed, rendezvous arranged, while bedrooms absorbed the heat of passions never meant for daylight. For every stern sermon on morality, there was a candle guttering low in some chamber where propriety was quietly abandoned. Then there were the moral panics of the age. Doctors warned of self-abuse, claiming it led to madness, weakness, even early death. Manuals circulated, instructing parents how to prevent their children from corrupting themselves at night. Special devices were sold to prevent nocturnal activity. Iron mittens, spiked rings, even mechanical alarms. Bedrooms thus became battlegrounds for the Victorian obsession with bodily control. What was natural was treated as shameful, and entire generations grew up under the shadow of fear instilled within the very place meant for rest. Equally fraught were questions of marital intimacy. Though marriage was celebrated as the proper outlet for desire, the act itself was shrouded in silence. Many brides entered their wedding nights ignorant of what awaited them, terrified and unprepared. Manuals, when consulted, emphasized duty over pleasure and warned against excessive indulgence. Yet human nature proved stronger than sermons. Bedrooms bore witness to tender unions, strained relations, and everything between. Letters, diaries, and even court records hint at frustrations, betrayals, and unspoken longings that played out between those four walls. For some, the bedroom became the stage for darker secrets still. Cases survive of cruelty, wives confined, husbands dominating, violence inflicted in private. With society reluctant to interfere in the domestic sphere, many endured suffering behind closed doors, their pain hidden from the world. The same heavy curtains that kept out the draught also concealed sorrow. And yet, the Victorian bedroom was not only a place of sin or sorrow, it was also a place of resistance and rebellion. Women read forbidden novels by candlelight, their imaginations fired by heroines who defied convention. Men questioned dogmas in secret diaries. Servants whispered truths in their shared garrets, truths that would never reach the ears of their masters. The bedroom, though policed by morality, became a space where people carved out their own lives, however quietly. We should not imagine, then, that Victorian bedrooms were pristine realms of virtue. They were as human as the people who inhabited them, filled with passion, secrecy, hypocrisy, and longing. For every Bible laid upon a nightstand, there was also a hidden letter. For every stern lecture on propriety, a secret rendezvous carried out in the shadows. The bedroom was, in short, the most honest room of the Victorian house. Here, away from the parlour's performance, people revealed themselves. In desire, in fear, in shame, in tenderness. Here then, we pause. We have glimpsed the Victorian bedroom not as a sanctuary of order, but as a chamber of secrets. Pregnancies concealed, affairs carried out, panics over morality, private rebellions, and the unspoken realities of married life. In the next part, we shall turn to the strange world of Victorian technology in the bedroom. The gadgets, contraptions, and mechanical wonders that promised comfort, health, or virtue, yet often produced more alarm than relief. When we imagine Victorian bedrooms, we think of mahogany, lace, and heavy drapery, not machinery. And yet, the 19th century was the age of invention, and even the most private chambers were not spared the intrusion of gadgets and contraptions. Some were designed for comfort, some for health, others for moral improvement. Few worked as advertised, but all reveal the restless Victorian desire to control and improve every aspect of life, even sleep. The first great innovation was the iron bedstead. Wooden frames had long been the standard, but iron promised cleanliness and strength. Unlike wood, iron did not harbour bedbugs, fleas, or other vermin. Reformers praised it as a triumph of hygiene, though the frames were cold to the touch and sometimes squeaked with alarming vigour. Still, the iron bedstead became a symbol of modernity, an emblem of the scientific bedroom where disease could be kept at bay by metal and discipline. Then came the hot water bottle, or in earlier forms, a brass or copper pan filled with coals and slid beneath the sheets. These devices promised warmth in drafty bedrooms, but they also carried risks. More than one bed was set alight by an overzealous warming pan, and scolds from cracked hot water bottles were not uncommon. The desire to conquer cold was intense. Bedrooms in great houses were vast and poorly heated. In smaller homes, fires were reserved for kitchens and parlours. Thus, inventions promising warmth found eager customers, even if they sometimes proved hazardous. The Victorians were also deeply concerned with ventilation. Medical authorities insisted that fresh air was essential to health, yet many feared night air as a carrier of miasmas. The result was a proliferation of window contraptions, ventilators, fans, tubes, and flaps that claimed to admit God's pure air, while keeping out fog, soot, or imagined poisons. Some households installed elaborate air pipes into bedrooms. Others relied on simpler gadgets to crack windows just so. The irony, of course, is that London's air was often thick with coal smoke, and breathing it deeply may have been worse than sealing windows tight. Health, in fact, was the great obsession. Bedrooms became arenas for medical devices of every sort. Mechanical rocking beds promised to soothe insomnia. Weighted blankets were prescribed for nervous conditions. Some contraptions claimed to align the spine during sleep, strapping the sleeper into rigid positions. Others promised to correct snoring, often by means of straps, gags, or curious masks. Laudanum might numb the restless, but inventors sought to cure them with springs, levers, and ingenious restraints. The result was a bedroom littered not only with pillows, but with peculiar contraptions of brass and leather. Perhaps most curious of all were the moral devices. In the great panic over self-abuse, inventors created gadgets to prevent nocturnal misbehavior. Bed alarms that rang when a sleeper shifted position. Restraints to keep hands pinned. Spiked rings and gloves to punish wandering fingers. Advertisements for such devices appeared in medical catalogues, couched in respectable language about health, yet everyone understood their true purpose. Thus, technology was enlisted not only to comfort, but to police morality. The bedroom became a site of surveillance, even in solitude. Lighting too saw transformation. Where once only candles or oil lamps had flickered, gaslight and then electricity crept in. Gas mantles hissed, filling rooms with a steady glow, though at the risk of leaks and explosions. Electric bulbs, in their infancy, were dim and unreliable, but carried the glamour of the future. For many, the soft glow of a candle remained preferable, its shadows lending comfort. Yet the arrival of modern light hinted that even the mysteries of night might one day be banished. And finally, there were the purely eccentric inventions: self-warming slippers to be placed by the bed, alarm clocks attached to bells loud enough to rouse a household, beds that tilted upright at a set hour, dumping the sleeper onto the floor in the name of punctuality. Some of these devices were patented. Few became popular, but their very existence reveals something essential about the Victorians: their refusal to leave even the quietest corner of life untouched by invention. In all of this, we glimpse a paradox. The Victorian bedroom was filled with heavy curtains, dark wood, and traditions centuries old. And yet, tucked among the lace pillows and family portraits were bottles, machines, and contraptions that promised to tame the uncontrollable: cold, air, sleep, desire. Few succeeded, many proved laughable, but the effort itself reveals a restless anxiety, a sense that the bedroom was not safe until every variable had been managed, every danger foreseen, every desire restrained. Here, then, we pause. We have seen the bedroom transformed by invention: iron bedsteads against vermin, warming pans against cold, ventilators against miasma, gadgets against sleeplessness, and even contraptions against temptation. It was a space of paradox, at once old-fashioned and startlingly modern. In the next part, we shall turn from technology to rituals of courtship and marriage, and how the bedroom became the site where social expectations, private fears, and intimate realities collided. Marriage was the cornerstone of Victorian respectability. Parlours displayed it with portraits and rings. Churches sanctified it with vows. Newspapers announced it with notices. Yet it was in the bedroom that marriage was tested, shaped, and endured. Behind closed doors, away from society's gaze, ideals met reality. The wedding night was often a moment of dread as much as expectation. For many brides, little genuine knowledge of intimacy was given before marriage. Mothers might offer vague warnings or, more often, silence. Manuals, when consulted, were filled with euphemisms, speaking of duties and unions, but offering little clarity. The result was that brides entered the marriage bed anxious, confused, and sometimes terrified. Grooms, too, faced their own burdens. Masculine authority was expected, but tenderness was not guaranteed. For some couples, the wedding night forged bonds of affection. For others, it inaugurated a lifetime of distance. The very furniture of the bed reflected these tensions. Large double beds symbolized union, yet in many households couples slept apart, in separate rooms or in adjoining chambers with a connecting door. Doctors often recommended this arrangement, claiming it was healthier, particularly for wives weakened by repeated pregnancies. Respectable manuals even suggested that moderation in marital intimacy was a mark of moral strength. Thus, the marriage bed was both a symbol of togetherness and a site of separation, an emblem of union, yet often an object of negotiation. It was not only physical intimacy, but also social expectation that weighed heavily. The bedroom was where heirs were expected to be conceived. Childlessness was viewed with pity or suspicion, and women bore the brunt of blame. Repeated pregnancies, miscarriages, and infant deaths haunted many bedrooms, layering the marriage bed with sorrow as well as duty. To be married in Victorian society was not simply to share affection. It was to produce children, maintain respectability, and uphold the family's reputation. Bedrooms thus carried the weight of lineage and legacy, as well as love. Yet, in diaries and letters, we glimpse more tender realities. Husbands who stayed beside their wives through long confinements. Wives who expressed joy in companionship, even if passion was muted. Couples who read to one another in bed, who shared laughter, who found moments of gentleness amidst a culture of stern duty. The bedroom, in such cases, became a sanctuary, not of secrecy or scandal, but of quiet affection hidden from the world. Still, scandal haunted marriage beds as well. Affairs, illegitimacy, and divorce were whispered about in polite society. Though divorce became legally possible after 1857, it was rare and ruinous, exposing private matters to public courts. Bedrooms, in such cases, became evidence. Sheets, letters, and servants' testimony might be called upon to prove betrayal. Thus, the marriage bed was not only a private space, but, when scandal erupted, a matter of public spectacle. It is striking, too, how class shaped these experiences. For the wealthy, bedrooms were suites of rooms, with space for privacy, servants to attend, and luxuries to ease discomfort. For the poor, the marriage bed might be a single straw mattress shared with children, or even a corner of the room separated by a curtain. Respectability was preached to all, but the reality of intimacy varied wildly according to circumstance. At the heart of it all was the Victorian attempt to reconcile love, duty, and secrecy. The ideal of romantic marriage, celebrated in novels and poetry, collided with the realities of childbirth, disease, poverty, and repression. The marriage bed, draped in lace and velvet, was both a symbol of aspiration and a witness to disappointment. And yet, it endured as the central feature of the bedroom, the object around which all else revolved. Upon it were inscribed the joys, sorrows, scandals, and quiet affections of an entire era. Here, then, we pause. We have seen the Victorian bedroom as the marriage chamber, at once stage and battleground, a place where expectation met reality, where duty outweighed desire, where tenderness survived amidst constraint. In the next part, we shall turn to the bedroom as a stage for illness and convalescence, the long vigils, the daily ministrations, and the way in which bedrooms became both prisons and places of care. To us, sickness belongs to hospitals and clinics. To the Victorians, it belonged to the home, and most often, to the bedroom. Here, beds became wards, and rooms became sick rooms. Curtains were drawn, fires kept low, and the air thickened with the smell of poultices, vinegar, and fear. Illness was a constant companion of Victorian life. Typhus, scarlet fever, tuberculosis, influenza, each could sweep through a household without warning. The bedroom was the arena where these battles were fought, sometimes won, often lost. The sick room ritual was elaborate. Windows might be cracked open or tightly shut, depending on whether the family believed in fresh air or feared the night vapors. Blankets were piled high, though doctors warned against stifling the patient. Chamber pots were kept at hand, for patients too weak to rise. The very furnishings of the room were rearranged to serve the sick, with tables brought near the bed to hold medicines, basins, and broths. The sick room was not only a medical space, but also a moral one. Patients were urged to face illness with stoicism, to read scripture, to use suffering as a form of spiritual purification. In such ways, even disease was folded into the moral fabric of the era. Doctors' visits were both dreaded and anticipated. The clatter of a carriage outside, the firm tread upon the stairs. These announced the arrival of a physician. He entered with his black bag, examined the patient with solemn gravity, and prescribed tonics, poultices, or bleeding. To the family, his presence was reassurance. To the patient, it was often a reminder of gravity. Yet many could not afford a doctor, and so mothers, wives, and daughters served as nurses. Their knowledge was practical, passed down through generations. How to cool a fevered brow, how to prepare broth, how to mix herbal teas. Bedrooms thus became training grounds of care, staffed not by professionals, but by family devotion. The pharmacy of the bedroom was vast. Bottles of laudanum, Dover's powders, cod liver oil, and quinine filled cabinets and drawers. Mustard plasters were slapped on chests to draw out congestion. Leeches, still in use, might be applied to ease inflammation. The line between cure and harm was thin, and patients sometimes suffered more from their treatments than from the disease itself. Servants bore the burden of preparing these remedies, fetching hot water, cleaning basins, disposing of soiled linens. The rhythm of the household bent around the sick room, the bedroom dictating the pulse of the entire home. For many illnesses, the bedroom was a prison of convalescence. Victorians spoke often of taking to one's bed. What began as a few days of rest could stretch into weeks or months. Patients languished, staring at wallpaper, listening to the sounds of life continuing in other rooms. Some never rose again. Others grew accustomed to their confinement, creating entire worlds around their pillows. Books, letters, visits from friends, quiet conversations in the half-light. Bedridden life was both monotonous and strangely rich. Diaries kept by invalids reveal reflections on mortality, on family, on the slow passage of time. The bedroom in such cases became less a chamber of sickness than a chamber of philosophy. But illness also exposed the inequalities of the age. For the wealthy, sick rooms were well furnished, with nurses hired to provide care and doctors visiting daily. For the poor, illness might mean lying in a damp cellar room with no fire, no privacy, no hope of professional attention. Death came more swiftly in such circumstances, and the bedroom, if one could call it that, offered little comfort. There was also the question of sanitation. Before germ theory was widely accepted, cleanliness was often misunderstood. Some families insisted on scrubbing and airing. Others believed that washing weakened the patient. It was not until later in the century, with Florence Nightingale's influence, that proper ventilation, fresh water, and hygiene became recognized as essential. The sick room thus sits at the crossroads of old superstition and new science, reflecting the uncertainty of an age grappling with modern medicine. And yet, even in illness, the bedroom was a place of connection. Family gathered at the bedside to offer comfort. Children were brought in to kiss fevered foreheads. Prayers were said aloud, psalms read, hands held. In such moments, the bedroom was less a chamber of suffering than a sanctuary of love, where bonds were tested and affirmed. Here, then, we pause. We have seen the Victorian bedroom as a sick room, filled with medicines and fears, shaped by rituals of care, marked by long vigils and whispered prayers. It was at once prison, hospital, and chapel, a space where illness reshaped daily life. In the next part, we shall explore the bedroom as a stage of childhood. The nursery chambers, the toys, the lullabies, and the ways in which children experience life, play, and sometimes loss within those four walls. In Victorian houses, the bedroom was not only a stage for adults, but also a world shaped for children. The nursery, sometimes a single room, sometimes a suite, stood apart from parlours and drawing rooms. It was a kingdom of toys, lessons, tears, and lullabies. Yet, like all Victorian spaces, it was layered with contradiction. A place of laughter and learning, but also of strict discipline and sudden loss. For wealthier families, nurseries were run by nannies and nurses. The mistress of the house might visit, but it was the nurse who oversaw daily life, waking children, washing them, dressing them in miniature versions of adult clothes. The nurse taught manners as much as hygiene, drilling in obedience with every button fastened and every shoe tied. Meals were taken in the nursery, simple and plain. Broth, porridge, milk pudding. Treats were rare, sweets rationed. Toys were permitted, but always with moral instruction. Dolls to train little girls in motherhood. Toy soldiers to foster bravery in boys. Building blocks to encourage discipline and order. The bedroom of the Victorian child, then, was not wholly theirs. It was curated, supervised, a chamber of learning disguised as play. For poorer families, the children's bedroom might be nothing more than a shared bed, with 3 or 4 siblings piled together. Blankets were scarce, air stale, space cramped. Yet even in such humble conditions, scraps of play persisted. A rag doll, a carved whistle, chalk on the floor. These bedrooms bore witness to resilience, though they were often overshadowed by hardship. Night in the nursery carried its own rituals. Nurses told stories by firelight, fairy tales, Bible parables, or cautionary fables of wicked children who met dire ends. Shadows danced on wallpaper as little ears absorbed both comfort and fear. Some children fell asleep to lullabies. Others cried into their pillows, longing for absent parents. The nursery bedroom more than any other, was steeped in stories. It was here that imagination first bloomed, fed by tales of heroes, monsters, and saints. Yet, these bedrooms were also haunted by loss. Child mortality remained high throughout much of the century. Croup, scarlet fever, diphtheria, illnesses struck swiftly, and nurseries could be transformed overnight into sick rooms. Tiny beds, once sites of laughter, became places of vigils and mourning. Parents, though accustomed to loss, felt it keenly. Many left memorials behind: a lock of hair, a toy untouched, a photograph of a child posed in death. The nursery, filled with life one week, might the next stand in silence, holding only absence. The discipline of the nursery was no less striking. Children were watched closely, their behavior corrected with stern words or the rod. Beds were made with military neatness, sheets tucked tight, shoes placed in rows. To sleep untidily was said to breed sloth, to wake late, a sign of weakness. Even the arrangement of beds was considered moral instruction, with elder siblings given pride of place and younger ones consigned to the corners. In such ways, the bedroom itself became a tool of order, shaping children into the disciplined adults society demanded. Yet for all this severity, childhood joy persisted. Diaries recall pillow fights in nurseries, whispered conversations after lights out, shared secrets between siblings. Toys were smuggled beneath sheets, stories whispered under covers, giggles stifled at the sound of a nurse's approaching steps. The nursery was thus a place of contradiction: strictness on the surface, mischief beneath. It was here that children learned not only obedience but also rebellion, small acts of defiance carried out in the safety of night. The design of children's bedrooms reflected the Victorian fascination with innocence. Walls might be decorated with prints of cherubs, or with alphabets designed to combine charm with learning. Beds were smaller, but often imitations of adult furniture, signaling that childhood was merely a prelude to maturity. Girls' rooms were adorned with dolls and sewing kits, boys with toy soldiers, books of exploration, maps of the empire. Even in sleep, children were prepared for their future roles, their bedrooms an apprenticeship for adult life. But beyond all this, the nursery was the emotional heart of the home. Parents, returning from parlours or dinners, often crept in to watch their children sleeping. Letters speak of fathers kneeling by cradles, mothers listening for a child's breathing in the dark. Whatever the rules imposed during the day, the quiet of the bedroom revealed tenderness. A tenderness often hidden in the harsher daylight of Victorian parenting. Here, then, we pause. We have seen the Victorian bedroom through the eyes of children. The nursery as a place of discipline and play, imagination and loss, joy and sorrow. We have glimpsed both the rigours imposed by adults and the small rebellions of youth. In the next part, we shall turn at last to the bedroom as a mirror of the wider Victorian world, how empire, industry, and society itself left their traces on quilts, curtains, and private habits. By now we have peered into every corner of the Victorian bedroom, its beds and curtains, its servants and secrets, its births and deaths, its inventions and scandals. But what remains is to see how this single room reflected the broader currents of Victorian society, its ambitions, its anxieties, and its contradictions. For in the end, the bedroom was not simply a chamber of sleep. It was a stage upon which the entire drama of 19th century life was played. Consider first the weight of empire. The very fabrics and furnishings of the bedroom bore witness to Britain's global reach. Mahogany from the Caribbean, cotton from India, opium tinctures imported from across the seas, all found their way into these intimate spaces. A Victorian bed was thus not only a place of rest, but also a product of global trade, tied invisibly to colonies and conquests. To lie upon such a bed was to be enfolded in empire, whether or not its sleepers gave thought to the faraway hands that produced the materials. Then there was the force of industry. Mass production brought iron bedsteads, cheap linens, patent medicines, alarm clocks, and countless trinkets into even modest homes. Bedrooms, once Spartan and plain, became crowded with objects, some useful, others frivolous. Where once possessions were few, now they multiplied, reflecting the new industrial abundance. And yet, with this abundance came anxiety. Reformers warned against clutter, excess, and indulgence. The very comforts industry provided became subjects of moral debate, as if the bedroom itself were a battleground between simplicity and extravagance. The class system was equally inscribed upon the bedroom. The wealthy reclined upon feather pillows beneath velvet drapery, tended by valets and maids. The poor shared cramped, damp rooms, their sleep broken by cold and hunger. Middle-class families strived to imitate the grandeur of their betters, furnishing bedrooms with cheaper imitations of fashionable styles. Thus, to step from one bedroom to another was to step between worlds, opulence above stairs, austerity below, aspiration in the growing suburbs. Bedrooms revealed, more than parlours ever could, the true condition of a family's life. The bedroom also mirrored the Victorian obsession with morality. Rules about posture in sleep, about marital conduct, about the dangers of novels, or the necessity of early rising. All these spoke to a society determined to regulate not just public behaviour, but private existence. The bed, the most intimate of objects, was transformed into a site of moral scrutiny. Yet, at the same time, the very secrecy of the bedroom encouraged rebellion. Here people read what they pleased, dreamed as they pleased, loved as they pleased. Behind curtains and under quilts, they carved out freedoms denied in the parlour or the church. The tension between duty and desire, morality and indulgence, was played out nightly in silence. The Victorian fear of death was nowhere more visible than here. Every bed was a potential deathbed, every chamber a potential sick room. Mourning practices seeped into daily life, with keepsakes of the dead kept in drawers and photographs of the departed placed discreetly on mantels. Death, never far from Victorian life, lingered always in the bedroom, making it both sanctuary and sepulchre. And yet, in the same rooms, children were conceived and born. Dreams were dreamt, futures imagined. The bedroom contained the whole span of existence, its walls absorbing laughter and tears alike. Perhaps most striking is how the Victorian bedroom reveals the contradictions of the age. It was a space of luxury and hardship, of morality and secrecy, of invention and superstition. It was both intensely private and yet constantly intruded upon by servants, doctors, and death itself. It was the place most hidden from visitors, yet the place that spoke most truthfully about those who lived there. If the parlour was the mask of Victorian life, the bedroom was its mirror. And so, as we draw this series to a close, we leave the Victorian bedroom with its heavy drapery, its iron bedstead, its drawers of secret letters, its bottles of laudanum, its prayers, its tears. It was the stage of birth and death, of marriage and betrayal, of illness and convalescence, of childhood and old age. It was a room that contained the entire life cycle, a chamber that, once entered, none ever truly left unchanged. The Victorians believed they were masters of their world, of empire, of industry, of morality. But in the bedroom, we see their fragility, their fears of death, their anxieties about desire, their constant attempts to regulate what could never be fully controlled. And in that fragility, we recognize something of ourselves. Here, then, we close the door gently. The lamp flickers low. The room falls silent, holding its secrets in the hush of history. The Victorian bedroom has spoken.